Hi folks, this is Alan. If you listen and like these podcasts, please consider making a small donation to keep these podcasts alive. Unfortunately, at the moment, I have no other means of generating an income, and I do really enjoy making these recordings for you. If you are like me, struggling to make ends meet, and you can't afford to make a small donation, then please simply press like and subscribe and recommend this podcast to a friend. That would be a tremendous help. And thanks for taking the time to listen. I really do appreciate it. And I will put the link in the description below. At the end of last week's episode, I left you as we headed downriver to catch up with another ferry boat, when there was an argument between the Frenchman Pierre and the young Brazilian guy driving the speedboat. It instantly erupted and almost escalated into a fistfight. Pierre was furious, as he told the young driver there'd be no more money. So the Brazilian angrily threw the boat sharply around and headed back to the port. It was only then that I found out why Pierre was so furious. He absolutely despised anyone who put the price up once it had been agreed. And he hated it with a passion. And I totally understood, because I was of the same mind, and it happens far too often when travelling. There have been occasions when I've got angry with a taxi or tuk-tuk driver for the same reason. Once the price has been agreed, that's it. For many years now, I've made sure that there's no hidden extra costs before I get in. And only a couple of times the drivers got offended when I've asked. And then, of course, I apologise. As we clambered up the steps at the dock, we were approached by another man with another promise of yet another boat. Pierre, the only one who spoke and understood Portuguese, was still pumped and angry, and he forcefully told the man about our speedboat experience. But this new guy promised that nothing like that would happen with him. So we struck up a new deal. The deal was for a boat travelling to Santarem and making sure that it stopped at Óbidos so Pierre could start his long cycle journey home. That's no problem, the man said. There's one leaving port tomorrow, around midday. And because of the trouble we'd had, he gave us a discount too, to restore our faith in human nature, he said. And Pierre later told me that it was because he was a God-fearing man, but I can't quite remember which religion he followed. Evangelical, I think. It was only a short walk along the street to one of the other busy jetties on the waterfront, and as we walked along, overlooking the boats, I noticed how the different jetties were all painted different colours. A very simple and effective way when giving someone directions to a ferry, I thought. And also on the street, in front of each boat that was leaving that day, was a chalk board displaying its destination and a simple table where someone sat and sold tickets. Our new boat was much smaller than the last one from Tabatinga, with only 1.5 decks for hammocks and a top viewing deck. It looked newer and better maintained. Luis Alonso was the name painted on the side of the hull. The port was super busy with boats of all sizes coming and going, and to my surprise, the largest by far in the port that day was a massive ocean-going liner type cruise ship called the Albeiro Star Grand Amazon Luxury 5-Star Floating Hotel. I had to write that down just to remember it. and it was just overflowing with rich American tourists. And it was seriously big, especially when compared to the largest of the Amazon ferries in port. But most of the boats in the port were relatively small, modest working boats, and quite a few of those were the white river taxis, powerful and fast, rocket-shaped craft that carried about 40 passengers, and they are possibly the quickest way to get anywhere up or down the river. And part of the deal that Pierre got us was that we could sleep on board the boat that night, saving us precious funds, not having to find a cheap guest house or backpacker hostel in the city. So we fixed up our hammocks on the empty deck, then set off into the city to check it out. Pierre had been to Manaus before and introduced Carlos and I to some of the well-known local dishes. And to me the city seemed to have a lot of European style and influences. I'm assuming Portuguese and maybe some Spanish. And one thing that did impress me was the large plaque on the dockside wall indicating the high water levels over the years. And it's obvious this city's been flooded from time to time, with the occasional super high water mark shown on the wall. 2012 seems to be a particularly bad year. 10-metre high tides seem to be the norm, according to the measurement on the dock wall. And when it comes to the forces of nature like that, such as high tides, extreme weather, lightning strikes or forest fires, droughts, storms, and the like, they've been occurring for thousands and thousands of years, well before we evolved, and they'll continue when we're gone. And if you've listened to my last 3 episodes, you'll have heard me mention the massive torrential rainstorms I've seen along the river. But in fact, the storm started as I left Peru's capital, Lima, on my overnight bus journey to Pucallpa, causing huge landslides that blocked many roads, and swollen rivers that have caused the roads to be washed away. And that's well before my river journey started, and the storms seem to be getting more and more frequent the further downriver I go. The 3 of us spent quite a long time walking around the city, and by early evening we were tired and slowly wandered back to the boat to find supplies still being loaded aboard from a truck on the quayside, and with 6 new passengers already asleep in their hammocks. Then, about an hour later, we were told that the boat would be moving to another jetty further along the dock. I stood on the top deck and watched as it manoeuvred into the new jetty, as the crew secured the ropes and put down the gangplank. And I stood there for some time and watched the comings and goings as the sun set over the historical city of Manaus. And this new jetty was busier and livelier, with dock workers and passengers alike filling the walkways around us. It was full of boats of all descriptions, some preparing to leave that evening, and others lifeless and going nowhere. Down on the jetty in front of our boat were 2 popular food stalls. I could hear the sizzling and smell the food as it was being cooked below me. And to my left, bobbing around next to us, were several river taxis plying for trade, enticing people to become passengers as they hurried down the steps from the street above. Each taxi boat had a young guy shouting out its destination as another sat at the table taking the money. Eventually, one by one, the floating taxis slowly reversed out and into the river. Then, with a loud, powerful roar, they disappeared into the darkness and faded into the night. There were now 11 hammocks on our deck when I went down to sleep. During the next morning, passengers boarded the boat, many with young children and always with plenty of luggage. They put up their hammocks, and soon our deck was full, with hammocks of every type and size, design and colour. Now, on my fourth boat in succession, I felt at ease with my knowledge of river travel. Around 12 o'clock midday, our boat slipped out of the port and into the fast-flowing river. The sky was overcast and grey and threatened more rain that day, and it was uncharacteristically windy too. So maybe more storms are on their way. And that day was one of sporadic storms and heavy torrential rain for most of it, and at one point during the afternoon I saw 5 totally separate storms around our boat. We seemed so small in comparison to the vast open space there, where the storms can make you feel powerless in such moments. As the storms turn the river into a surging torrent of water which carries a powerful force, a silent force and a power only big rivers have, but with the added hidden dangers of half-submerged tree trunks and other forest debris. Our second day was as grey and as blustery as the first, but now we had a different problem. The turbo on the boat's engine had broken, belching out thick clouds of black smoke as our speed dropped to 0. Now our boat was at the mercy of the river, just drifting on the strong swirling currents. And once the torrential rain had stopped, I went up onto the top deck and just watched the wide mighty river beneath us and wondered just how deep it must be. And then my mind turned to the mechanic in the engine room. I could imagine him working feverishly in the belly of the boat, battling to get the turbo repaired. But surprisingly, it only took a couple of hours. Then I felt the engine fire up again beneath me. Then there was nothing more than the gentle hum of the marine engine once again. All was good. And now, with the turbo repaired, the boat picked up speed, and we were back to normal again in the middle of the river. But then my attention was captured by loud voices and shouting from the lower deck. I could hear people arguing, shouting at each other. It seemed as though there was an argument between a husband and wife, and the man's tone was shouting orders at the woman, until the loud voices drifted away, and I thought nothing more of it. Time passed slowly that day, with most passengers staying below decks because of the bad wet weather. When we came to another port, another town, I was still leaning against the railings on the top deck as we slipped into the port of Parachins. We dropped off quite a few passengers there and took on some new ones. With only a handful of food sellers and a couple of motor taxi riders lingering on the dockside, we pulled away back into the flow of the river, when suddenly we started returning to the dock again, so a woman and her son could disembark. Obviously the woman from the argument earlier. She looked angry and embarrassed all at the same time, and she'd been crying. Her son was about 11 or 12 and helped his mother drag the heavy suitcases away from the boat. And there were several people on the dockside who rushed over to stop the man getting off too, and they seemed to be arguing with him. Apparently there had been a domestic dispute, and the woman had managed to break away from her husband. She was now standing on the dock, with the husband still on the boat. Then the boat moved away once again and slipped back into the fast-flowing river, where I watched a policeman arrive on a motorbike and start talking to the mother and son. As the dock The people and their problems quickly disappeared behind us. The river seemed stronger now, flowing faster than ever, faster than at any other time since I started my journey down this river. It might not be as turbulent or as unpredictable as the Mekong, but this river has a power all of its own. And I spend hours on that top deck just thinking about life and its marvels. And later, further downriver, we rounded a bend, and I could see our next port of call some way off in front of us. And as it got closer, I realized there was a big crowd of people waiting on the small iron jetty. And the nearer we got, the more animated and excited the crowd got to see the boat coming. They were already waiting in anticipation, and the colourful crowd consisted of food sellers, new passengers, a handful of taxi drivers, and a few friends and family waiting. The crowd surged forward as the food sellers pushed to the front to get nearer their customers. For some reason, the food sellers at this port weren't allowed on the boat, but they'd found an ingenious method of getting the food to the customers. They had long bamboo poles with half plastic drink bottles fixed to the top, like a cup, and also a hook, and this hook was to hang the bag of food on. Then it was raised up to the waiting passenger, even to the top deck. And the plastic cup on top, well, that was for the money. Bags of food were quickly passed up to shouting customers. It was a bit of a frenzy, with the passengers trying to get off with their luggage as new passengers tried to get on, both forcing their way through the scrum of people on the dock. It looked like chaos from where I was standing. And as well as that, an older couple had transported a complete kitchen with them on the boat, and now they were trying to unload it onto the crowded dock. It looked like mayhem. But all in all, we were there for about 35 minutes. And just before the boat pulled away from the dock, a female passenger wanted some more food. She called down to a teenage boy. He grabbed a bag of food, and with the boat about 2 meters from the dockside, he jumped onto the boat and climbed up the side and gave her the bag of food and got his money. By now, the boat must have been 30 meters out, heading towards the river, when the kid jumped off the side and into the brown, muddy water and swam back to the dock as all the passengers clapped and cheered. Pierre gathered his belongings together, and as the boat manoeuvred into the port of Obidos, we said our farewells and our goodbyes. And Carlos and I watched him walk down the gangplank and away to cycle home, using the roads that run northeast through the rainforest. And he still had a long, long way to go. And that's when I started thinking about how we all say goodbye, or how I say goodbye as a modern-day backpacking nomad. And it does depend on who it is, but for me, it's usually a word or two, telling the other person that I'm there for them if they ever need help. Or sometimes it's just a handshake or a nod of acknowledgement. As I say, it depends who it is. But I feel it's not a good time to get too emotional. Otherwise, it can create anxiety and a feeling of instant loneliness in the person leaving, as they suddenly find themselves back on their own, back on the road. Fortunately, these days, we're never too far away from the internet or Wi-Fi or free phone calls. And often it's important to keep in touch with fellow travellers to make sure they're still okay. With Pierre now on his way home, that only left Carlos and myself. And I mustn't forget or lose focus on why I'm here and why I'm on the river in the first place. So tune in next week to hear my continuing account of my journey down the great Amazon River.
Well, that's all for this week, folks. And please remember, the same road can be travelled 1,000 different ways, so get out there and make it your own. Until next week.